Reflections of a Russian Statesman by Konstantin Petrovich Pobyedonostseff. Chapter 6. Public Instruction. When reason is severed from life, it becomes at once artificial, formal, and in consequence sterile. Problems are then regarded and solved from the point of view of abstract propositions and principles taken on faith, and thought glides along the surface of things, never seeking to penetrate its object and ignoring the facts of actual life. Of such abstractions and generalities, the number has multiplied incredibly, especially since the end of the last century. They have filled our lives, they have made our legislation independent of the facts of existence, and have set up science itself in opposition to life and its phenomena. In the wake of the doctrinaires of science, whose doctrinarianism often approaches infatuation, in the wake of adepts of scholasticism marches the great herd of intellect. Abstract propositions attain the rank of indisputable axioms, which to oppose would be a heavy and often impossible task. It is difficult to estimate the damage which legislation has suffered from such abstractions, and how they have fettered, hand and foot, the living organism of social life with artificial formulas imposed by force. In the van of this movement marched the French, who first gave the sanction of fashion to the movement of the equalization of the national life by means of abstract principles deduced from hypothetical premises. The example of France has been followed by all, even by those states in which the conditions of life and the ethnical, geographical, and climatic conditions are infinitely varied. How much even our own country has suffered from such experiments, there is no need to remark. Take, for instance, the phrases repeated unto weariness among us and everywhere: free education, obligatory attendance, the restriction of child labor during the years of obligatory attendance. There can be no question that learning is light, and that ignorance is darkness, but in the application of this rule, we must take care to be ruled by common sense, and to abstain from violating that freedom, of which we hear so much, and which our legislators so ruthlessly restrict. Inspired by an idle saying that the schoolmaster won the battle of Sadowa, we multiply our model schools and schoolmasters, ignoring the requirements both of children and of parents, of climate and of nature itself. We refuse to recognize what experience has shown, that the school is a deceptive formality where its roots have taken no hold among the people, where it fails to meet the people's necessities and to accord with the economy of its life. The school alone is suited to the people which pleases them, and the enlightening influence of which they see and feel, but all schools are repugnant to them to which they are driven by force, under threats of punishment, or which are organized in ignorance of the people's tastes and necessities on the fantasies of doctrinaires. In such schools, the work becomes mechanical. The school resembles an office, with all the formality and weariness which office life involves. The legislator is satisfied when he has founded and organized in certain localities a certain number of similar institutions adorned with the inscription, "School." For these establishments, money must be raised. Attendance is secured under penalty. A great staff of inspectors is organized whose duty is to see the parents and poor and working men send their children to school at the established age. Already all governments have transgressed the line at which public instruction begins to show its reverse side. Everywhere, official education flourishes at the expense of that real education in the sphere of domestic, professional, and social life, which is a vital element of success. But infinite evil has been wrought by the prevalent confusion of knowledge and power. Seduced by the fantasy of universal enlightenment, we misname education a certain sum of knowledge acquired by completing the courses of schools, skillfully elaborated in the studies of pedagogues. Having organized our school thus, we isolate it from life. and secure by force the attendance of children, whom we subject to a process of intellectual training in accordance with our program. But we ignore or forget that the mass of children whom we educate must earn their daily bread, a labor for which the abstract notions on which our programs are constructed will be in vain, while in the interests of some imaginary knowledge we withhold that training and productive labor which alone will bear fruit. Such are the results of our complex educational system, and such are the causes of the aversion with which the masses regard our schools, for which they can find no use. The vulgar conception of education is true enough, but unhappily it is disregarded in the organization of the modern school. In the popular mind, the function of a school is to teach the elements of reading, writing, and arithmetic, and in union with these, the duty of knowing, loving, and fearing God, of loving our native land, and of honoring our parents. These are the elements of knowledge, and the sentiments which together form the basis of conscience in man, and give to him the moral strength needed for the preservation of his equilibrium in life, for the maintenance of struggle with the evil impulses of his nature, and with the evil sentiments and temptations of the mind. It is an unhappy day when education tears the child from the surroundings in which he first acquired the elements of his future calling, those exercises of his early years through which he acquires, almost unconsciously, the taste and capacity for work. The boy who wishes to become a bachelor or a master of arts must begin his studies at a certain age, and in due time pass through a given course of knowledge. But the vast majority of children must learn to live by the work of their hands. For such work, physical training is needed from the earliest age. To close the door to such preparations, that time may be saved for the teaching of schools, is to place a burden upon the lives of the masses who have to struggle for their daily bread, and to shackle in the family the natural development of those economic forces which together constitute the capital of the Commonwealth. The sailor qualifies for his calling by spending his boyhood on the sea. The miner prepares for his work by early years spent in the subterranean passages of mines. To the agriculturalist, it is even more essential that he shall become accustomed to his future work, that he may learn to love it in childhood, in the presence of nature, beside his herds and his plow, in the midst of his fields and his meadows. Yet we waste our time discussing courses for elementary schools and obligatory programs, which are to be the basis of a finished education. One would include an encyclopedic instruction under the barbarous term Rodino Viedeni, knowledge of the fatherland. Another insists on the necessity of the agriculturalist to know physics, chemistry, agricultural economy, and medicine, while a third demands a course of political economy and jurisprudence. But few reflect that by tearing the child from the domestic hearth for such a lofty destiny, they deprive his parents of a productive force which is essential to the maintenance of the home, while by raising before his eyes the mirage of illusory learning, they corrupt his mind and subject it to the temptations of vanity and conceit. The new school of civilizers has but one receipt for the improvement of humanity: war with the prejudices and ignorance of the people. In the opinion of the writers of this school, all the misfortunes of humanity have had their origin in a few irrational sentiments and convictions which the masses have adhered to through the course of centuries, and which it is necessary to uproot and destroy. Among such dangerous sentiments and convictions, they classify all the things they do not admit of logic demonstration. Were all men, say these philosophers, to develop their minds and to train their judgments, instead of thinking, feeling, and living by convictions taken on faith, the golden age of humanity would soon begin. The world, in one generation, would move as far as it has moved in the course of centuries. If the intellectual faculties of man could be raised but 1 degree, the results would be inestimable. Almost every one of us has one syllogism which has already become rooted in the mind through immediate impressions received in infancy. If to this syllogism we could add another and acquire the faculty for uniting both in one chain of speculation, the face of the universe would be transformed and the destiny of humanity changed. Such is the end to which we are to be led, and such the problem of progress and enlightenment as stated by the philosophers of the 19th century. Why quarrel with this, we are asked? But to this problem there is another, a reverse and threatening side, which is too often ignored. Humanity is endowed with another very effective force, inertia. As the ballast in a ship, inertia sustains humanity in the crisis of its history, and so inseparable has it become that without it, all measured progress would be impossible. This force, which the superficial thinkers of the new school confound with ignorance and stupidity, is absolutely essential for the prosperity of society. Destroy it, and you deprive the world of that stability which serves as the fulcrum of progress. Contempt or ignorance of this force is the great failing of modern progressives. What, let us ask, is a prejudice? A prejudice, we are told, is an opinion without a rational base, an opinion which admits of no logical demonstration. All such opinions must be eradicated. But how? By awakening in every man the faculty of thought, and by placing the opinions of every man in dependence upon logical deduction. Very true, but true, unhappily, only as an abstract theory. In actual life, we find that we can seldom trust the operations of the logical faculty in man, that in practical affairs, we rely more upon the man who holds stubbornly and undeservedly opinions which he has taken directly, opinions which satisfy the instincts and necessities of his nature, than on him who is ready at a moment's notice to change his opinions at the guidance of logic, because it appeals to him as the unanswerable voice of reason. Such men soon become the slaves of every argument which they cannot answer at a moment's notice. They surrender unreservedly themselves and all their experience to every onslaught of logical argument on every imaginable subject. They are defenseless against theories and deductions unless they possess an arsenal of logical weapons with which, at a moment's notice, to confound their adversaries. Let us once grant that the syllogism is the highest and the infallible form of truth, and practical life becomes the slave of speculation. Common sense surrenders to folly, and stupidity parading in the armor of formulas. The wisdom, tried by life, must yield to the first youth it meets skilled in the alphabet of formal reasoning. It is easy to foresee the fate of the masses if our reformers succeeded in converting them to unreserved faith in the infallibility of formal logic. The precious virtue of steadfastness, which has hitherto sustained society, would vanish in a day. Further, we would ask, must it be admitted that obstinacy in convictions accepted on faith stands of necessity in opposition to logic? That the so-called prejudice indicates always slowness or inactivity of thought? This has not been proved. We have no reason to suppose that a man who is willing to surrender his opinions and beliefs at the bidding of demonstrative logic is necessarily more logical and rational than he who, admitting no argument, stubbornly holds to his beliefs. On the contrary, the obstinacy of the simple man in opinions which he holds on faith proceeds, although for the most part without recognition by himself, from instinctive but in the highest degree logical impulses. The simple man instinctively feels that the change of opinion which is thrust upon him by arguments apparently irrefutable would involve the modification of his whole system of outlook upon life, a system for which perhaps there is no conscious justification, but which is indissolubly bound up with his being and constitutes his spiritual life. This is the chain which with subtle dialectics contemporary educators seek to break, and, unhappily, too often succeed in breaking. But the simple, common-sense man knows that, surrendering unresistingly to the first assault of logical argument, he must surrender to all, and that the great world of his spiritual conceptions cannot be abandoned merely because he is not in a position logically to overthrow the arguments directed against one of its facts. In vain the cunning adversary seeks to ridicule him, to convict him of absurdity. He is in no way absurd, but far abler than his opponent. He may not indeed analyze in all their relations the phenomena of his spiritual life. He may not dispose of the dialectical skill of his adversary, but, relying on his own good sense, he shows thereby that he cherishes opinions, guards them, and values the truth of his convictions, not in the view of rational formalities, but in all their completeness. Such are the methods employed by those who wish to enlighten the people. Such methods may be classified under the title of subtle. At night, when men are sleeping, the subtle one appears, disguised in the mask of benevolence and charity, and sows his tares. For him, neither knowledge nor ability is needed. Subtlety only is required. Little intellect is needed, for instance, to approach a simple man at an opportune moment and sow distrust in his soul. Why dost thou pray to thy St. Nicholas? Hast thou ever seen St. Nicholas helping those who pray for him? Or to seek some young girl of humble family and say, who has proven to thee that it is thy lot to depend upon others forever, and to be a slave of thy husband? Reason tells thee that thou art his equal in all things, that thou hast equal rights with him in all. Or to steal between a young man and his parents with such words as these: by what logic art thou bound to obey thy parents? Who told thee to respect them, when thy reason tells thee they are unworthy of respect? What are the bonds between you but an accident of nature? Thou art a free man, the equal of the best. Armed with speeches such as these, the subtle wanderer among the simple and the weak throughout the 4 quarters of our land, under the pretext of guidance, stealing the sheep from the flock and leading or driving them into the wilderness. This has been Mr. Patriarch. Thank you very much for joining me. This has been Chapter 6 of Reflections of a Russian Statesman. Please join us next time for Chapter 7, The Law. Special thanks to all my backers for helping support me financially. If you'd like to contribute, please consider donating through Subscribestar or PayPal. Links can be found in the description. I'll see you next time.